You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. Do you know the name of the singer?
Idina Menzel.
Yeah, that's Idina Menzel.
She's great in that.
It's a classic American singer by the name of Thurl Ravenscroft.
Ravenscroft?
That was my favorite character in the new Innistrad set.
I took one of those stupid Harry Potter tests one time, and they told me I was in Ravenscroft. And my family was ashamed because they were all Slytherin.
Is Ravenclaw the dorks, or is that Hufflepuff?
Ravensclaw is like the theater kids.
I thought Ravensclaw were the jocks.
No,
that's Harry's.
that's Gryffindor.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're talking about this.
This canceled IP.
Yeah. Unlike us, we're not canceled, right, Stan?
Not yet.
5 years.
Any day now. Once they read my tweets. Hello and welcome to episode 254 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav, here home for the holidays in Chicago, Illinois. I'm back, mom and dad.
He's back, baby.
The prodigal podcaster has returned. It's Stan.
And with me on the line from Denver, Colorado is the one and only Shane Beeps.
Stanislav, my friend, I'm glad we're recording in the similar time zones. I'm one behind. That's basically the same.
Yeah, I can tell you, Shane, the future is bright.
Is it? I thought it would be slightly dimmer.
I've gotten an hour's worth of current events before you, so you're going to love it when it reaches you on the wire.
Let me tell you, the news out of Colorado is hot right now, guys. We're not going to talk about it, but wow, it's spicy.
A spicy meatball.
Also with us, the godfather of meatballs, Chicago's godfather of sausage, the sausage king himself.
The sausage king.
Dave Harbarger.
Yeah, it's taken me 2 years, but I am the sausage king of Oak Park. It's a small town, but
I thought we didn't mention Oak Park because you didn't want people to find you in the dense urban jungle of Oak Park. They're gonna be like knocking on doors. Is Dave here?
Well, now that I'm a sausage king,
Yeah, Dave's realized the cachet that comes with a certain western suburb.
People tour my house.
It's a Frank Lloyd Wright.
He lives next to some Frank Lloyd Wrights. It may as well be. Didn't Frank Lloyd Wright just do your new backyard fence, actually?
Yeah, the one that my neighbors are mad about. That's why they can't take it down, though, because the Architectural Society has already declared it a landmark.
You know what else is a landmark of card gaming accessories?
Tell me.
Heavy play.
Heavy play is like a fence that you can put up around your cards that will make your neighbors mad, but you'll love it.
Right. And they're mad because they're jealous, because they know you've got the deck boxes and the playmats and the sleeves that are going to improve your gameplay and your game day. Thanks to their enhanced ergonomic mobility and protection. I brought my heavy play stuff with me to Chicago. You know, I always travel with decks. Of course they're in my heavy play boxes. Like, what else am I going to use? Nothing. It's either heavy play or a rubber band, and I'm all out of rubber bands.
Thanks, Roddy.
Heavy Play's unique Equip Mag system allows you to magnetically attach dice, bundle decks, and carry your playmat all in a single hand through airport security or wherever your life takes you. And they're also coming soon to your LGS. If they're not in your LGS already, ask your LGS to stock them. That's one of the best ways to make sure Heavy Play accessories are available in your community.
Demand them.
And if you shop now at heavyplay.com, you can use promo code TheDiveDown2023 and you'll get 10% off your first order.
At heavyplay.com?
At heavyplay.com. That's HTTPS.
Is it a secure website?
You don't need www anymore. You can just do https://heavyplay.com.
I don't even think you need the HTTP thing. I think the browser does it for you.
Listen, as long as everybody's certificates are all set up and are up to date, and we've done all the redirects when people have set up your website for you, yes, all of those things will work. However, it's not always a guarantee.
I hope Randy's got some good certificates. It would be embarrassing if he didn't, and we're stating this. What are we doing this week, Stan?
That's a good question. Dave, you tell us.
It is time to shut this down for the year.
Yes.
Wow, I thought you were about to cancel the show.
Not yet. They haven't seen your tweets yet. We're waiting for everybody else for that part.
We're waiting until Chicago for that.
Yeah. 2023 is coming to an end, and we are going to take a little breather this episode. Maybe we're going to talk about some of what happened in 2023. Maybe we're going to talk about the laughs, the loves we had, the hates, and the greats, as I like to think about it sometimes. Maybe not just Magic. Maybe we'll actually do a wind down for the first time in 2023 and share something personal about ourselves. Too bad, losers. It's our time.
You talking
now.
to us?
No, not you. It's our time now. In other words, it's time to wind down the dive down for 2023.
I mean, we gotta the primary reason I do this podcast is because I get to hang out with like you guys every week. Ideally, all y'all. So that's really what I look every. So here's a little peek behind the curtain for everybody. Here's my week. Okay, here's my usual week. It's like we get the episode back on Wednesday morning. I listen to the episode. I trim out anything in there that I don't want. We release it on Thursday morning. I'm free for like maybe 2 days,
12 hours.
Right? I'm mentally free of any obligation to Magic. And then the weekend rolls around and I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to do another episode on Monday or maybe this weekend because, Stanislav's schedule and stuff like that. Then it happens all again. Then on, the weekend hits or it's Monday night and I'm like, oh, I'm tired. We got to do another episode. And then I'm always revitalized by the end of the episode. I'm never tired at the end of the episode. I'm always like, oh, that was a good conversation. That was a good episode. So that's why I keep doing it, is because even though we do it every week and it feels like sometimes like an obligation, it's always like a fun one that I enjoy doing. It keeps me engaged with this game we love and hate.
I think it's important to remember how essential it is, I think, to people's mental health to have a third place. Are you familiar with the concept of third place?
Yes.
Oh, yes. That was grad school for me. I had 2 years of third place.
That's not what we mean.
Yeah, Dave's
This
referring to like the
podcast-
bus vestibule.
Yes, the bus. Yep,
The
bus
coffee
vestibule.
shop, the bar, cheers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that really the dive down in this world that has happened to us in the last few years, that is our third place. We come here and we put our third place out on the internet for people to hear. But
That's funny.
it's for us and it's for you. But this one's really for us.
Somehow that works out usually. I don't know how it happened, but
Yeah. However, it wouldn't really be the dive down if we weren't going to do at least one more thing to check off our list.
yeah.
Yeah. So we have to talk about the regional championship in Atlanta from this weekend in Pioneer. We're going to try to keep it brief so we can have some fun times just gabbing at the end of this episode. But
So it's like the final thing on the advent calendar if you are an advent calendar user.
day 23 is you open it up and you get one last tournament results, and day 24
Yes.
you open it up and you get recommendations for podcasts you give not a single about.
The final beep of the year. Here's hoping.
Check that one off your bingo cards, people. But first, housekeeping.
All right. We've got some 2 new patrons. We've got George, Jorge, Z, Seth M. We have no increased tiers, no new reviews. We did have some, of course, Spotify engagement. I think it was some repeat regulars there in the Spotify comments. You don't get shouts out every week, but thank you for engaging there.
Yes. We did have one person ask if we send Patreon swag to Austria. Now, I didn't publish
we've
this
done it
account
before.
because there's no way for me to reply to these people. I will say, I don't know if the tweet was, "You're late. Are you guys ever going to send my stuff to Austria, or do you theoretically send things to Europe?" And I will say, yes, we do theoretically send things to Europe. It just takes 12 to 18 months to do it.
I'm caught up on the international. That's for sure.
Perfect.
I definitely, and one from Austria was in there 2 months ago when I sent it. I did get one back from Italy, so I apologize, Lorenzo. If you were still waiting on that, if you're still out there, get me on Discord, my friend.
Yeah, if you would like to see, randomly if our swag can ship to the country where you live in, check us out on patreon.com/thedivedown. We appreciate your support. It has been 5 years since the dive down started, essentially.
This week, basically.
This episode is basically the 5-year anniversary. We wouldn't be here without the support of the people on Patreon, the people in our Discord, and all those kind of things. So if you want to join up, hang out, check it out, patreon.com/thedivedown. You can buy some apparel from us if you want a logo or a hat or something like that from our store. That is thedivedown.com/store. You can go to Mana Traders to rent Magic Online, Magic the Gathering cards, whether you want to play Pioneer or you want to play Modern, or you want to play some other format that we don't talk about that much that's on Moto, you can get those from manatraders.com. Use code TheDiveDown23 for 10% off your first 2 months of rentals, manatraders.com. And then we have plenty of stuff to talk about later as well.
Regional championships.
It's time.
This is my favorite RC. This is my favorite breakdown in a long time because I didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of breakdowns.
Uh-huh.
Are you saying that I don't?
I'm saying I don't think you do an inordinate amount of breakdowns.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Shane, I'm on your side.
I didn't know there were sides, but I'm glad you're taking mine.
Yeah,
did you guys watch The Bear?
Yeah, I've seen The Bear.
Maybe we're going to talk about it later. This is starting to have some the Dinner of Seven Fishes kind of vibe. Let's just carry that through the whole episode.
Perfect. Here. Some antagonism?
Yeah. Some casual antagonism in a car driving.
We're going to go back to second and third grade, Dave.
Yeah, exactly.
Shall we begin by antagonizing the notion that our region is the United States of America, 300 plus million people spanning the fourth largest country in the world? That's a region.
Yeah.
Think about it.
In Canada. Or no, it's not Canada. Drat. Canada's really big. Did you know that? They only have 45 million people.
Yeah, and most of them live below the northern border of the United States. Let that sink in.
What?
Let that sink in.
That's wild.
Yes. This was the largest invite-only Magic tournament of all time. Did you guys know that?
I heard that today, actually.
I didn't realize there were that many people. Holy smokes, there's a lot of folks here.
1,307 players at this RC. Yeah, I think that Frank Karsten or somebody I saw tweeting about it was looking for proof that this was... it's certainly the largest invite-only Magic tournament in a long time. The question was this the largest one ever? And I think there's a good shot. There's never been a Pro Tour with 1,300 people in it. So, checkmate.
I'm not going to argue.
Take that, vendors.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Same number of rounds as the Canadian RC, by the way, with 4 times the players.
And the Canadian Highlander RC. So last week we spent a bunch of time breaking down the big questions that we had at the events. What might happen post bans? What might happen from unbans and Pioneer? What new cards were going to dominate? How would the meta turn out? We took a shot at the meta. Shane, are you ready to revisit our predictions of what was going to happen in the meta?
We did pretty well.
Do you think so?
I mean, I was closest, I thought, but you're claiming Devin is.
Devin was clearly the closest.
In what way were you the closest?
Okay, so because I said that Phoenix would be number 1, and Izzet plus Grixis was just under Rakdos, although Devin was on record saying that he thought Rakdos would be slightly higher, and he was correct. Then I had Convoke and Amalia. I can't even remember. I had this all written in Discord. But I thought we were all fairly close. The one that we missed was Azorius Control, of course. I feel embarrassed because I was like, I just didn't plant my flag. I was like, Azorius Control will likely. I was like, Azorius Control people I wouldn't be surprised if it shows up. And then it was, the 4th most represented deck in the room.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think if you believe the graphics that Dreamhack put out on Twitter and put on their stream, we were actually kind of close. But their graphics were not right.
And yeah, they were probably based off of the Melee, which they didn't have time to go through and look at 1,300 decks.
Exactly. And apparently a bunch of people were being jokesters again and had messed up their deck names on purpose.
I mean, also not on purpose. I saw some stuff where it was Abzan combo for Amalia and, some slightly obfuscated things or just things I can understand why they would not use that. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of jokers out there.
Are you guys beginning to think or feel that the jokers aren't heeding our warnings about naming their deck?
I mean, it's just me yelling into the wind at this point. It's like me trying to talk to my 5-year-old and my 8-year-old, being like, why don't you guys listen to me? And they just don't even have the concept of listening.
Dave, you're a real modern day Sisyphus. Except that the stone that you push up the hill is just poorly titled names of Magic decks on MTG Melee.
Exactly. I mean, listen, here's Frank Karsten's data on the RC. Here's what it says. Rakdos Midrange, 15.9%, which is actually 2% higher almost than what Dreamhack reported for the deck.
Yeah.
Here's the first difference is that Amalia combo was 11.8%. That's 2.5% higher than what was originally reported during the day of recording.
That's wild.
Which is interesting. So Amalia combo was probably the second most played deck, actually. Is it Phoenix? 10.2%. They actually nailed that one. So there wasn't much ambiguity in that, but it went from second to third place.
Phoenix player is so honorable.
Yes. Azorius Control, 8.4%, Boros Convoke at 7%, and Rakdos Sacrifice at 5%. For some reason, Dreamhack reported that Lotus Field combo was 6.6% of the metagame, and Frank is reporting that it was only 4.3% of the metagame. I guess that's because of Azorius Lotus Field.
Like, must have been.
Chunking them together into a single deck. But it depends on if you think those are the same or if they're not.
No,
however,
they're not.
Here's the thing. The big difference here really is that Amalia combo, a new deck, was probably the second most registered deck for this, the largest invite-only Magic the Gathering tournament of all time.
Yeah, of course it was.
Of course it was. Really, I don't think any of us had it higher than fourth in our list, right? I guess Devin had it third.
I thought Devin had it top three. I thought Devin
had it third.
Rakdos, Phoenix, Amalia as the three most popular decks. If I recall listening correctly while doing dishes.
Checking my notes. Yeah, I had Amalia fourth. So.
Yeah. And then the other thing is we had a huge miss. We all hated Azorius Control, and Azorius was the fourth highest registered deck in this tournament. And it was kind of far and away the deck with the highest win percentage, which I don't remember the last time I saw a tournament where Blue-White Control was the quote-unquote the best deck. But we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, good timing and good cards. I mean, we'll talk, like you said, we'll get in the weeds on that, but...
Yeah. The big problem is I'm just going to have to continue to eat crow on Amalia. It's my bad. But also, again, the deck that I played didn't even have quarter calling in it, let alone return to the ranks. So
I just thought you meant like on what you were saying last week, which is like, I think you and Devin were both kind of thinking that people were going to be able to metagame against this deck.
Yeah.
And I think people underestimated just how much this deck can grind.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of, still present the false tempo strategy that it can do early on. So
yeah, I think myself and you guys and what I've been hearing elsewhere in Magic spheres, people assumed Amalia combo was soft to decks like Rakdos and Phoenix that are just so full of creature removal, but that just doesn't seem the case. That, to Shane's point, like the deck can grind because it can either like set up conditions on how to recover immediately after it deals with removal or sweepers or whatever, or it can just like not like blank removal spells, but get all the creatures back from the graveyard and win on the spot.
Yeah. It's just value.
Recur, I think, is the word we're looking for there, Stan. Recur. It can recur its threats.
I concur.
Bring its combo back. Yeah.
But it's not, we're going to talk more about these decks later. I don't want to interrupt Dave on his metagame path through day 1 and day 2.
But here's the problem. So now if we look at conversion data, we really only have the Dreamhack data to look at, or at least the way that they titled things.
Yeah, so everything's going to be a little bit fudged.
I think it's a little bit off because of deck names. And I didn't have time to go back and manually reconcile things because it was 1,300 decks. Sorry. But here's the notable changes from day 1 to day 2. So Amalia went from being the second deck to being the most played deck in day 2. 14.7% of the metagame. Again, I think that's might even be underreported given the way that things were compared between Frank's data and the Dreamhack data originally. Then you have Rack Mid at 14%. You have Azorius Control at 11%, and Phoenix also at 11%. Azorius Controls, I guess, is closer to 12%. These 4 decks all increased or maintained their share between the days. One of the other big ones is Enigmatic Fires, of course, which didn't even show up in the breakdown of day 1, at least according to Dreamhack. However, on Frank's data, it was 2.3% of the meta. On day 2, it was 4.3% of the meta. So it actually went up quite a bit as well. So Amalia went up 5%, Control went up 4%. That is a big shift for decks converting between day 1 and day 2. We don't usually see things quite that much, but I think it's just a hint of what was actually going on in this tournament for sure. And then the losers, Convoke, Lotus Field, Greasefang. Greasefang was all around 1% or so that they lost. And then the big difference actually is other. of course. Other went from being 31% of the day one meta to being 25% of the field on day two. So that explains where the extra metagame share came for the decks that kind of came out on the top.
Yep. It's always a big bite out of other.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Bite and other. So on our continued march from day one to day two at the top eight was pretty funny, right?
Well, what makes it funny for you?
I mean, it was 4 decks, 2 copies each.
Yeah, perfect. The perfect meta. You have 4 decks to play.
Now, in the notes, I wrote 2 Rack Mid, 2 Izzet Phoenix, 2 Amalia combo, 2 Izzet Phoenix, and 2 Blue Eye Control. That's 10 decks, guys. I just realized this. So I'm going to play that back more slowly for everybody. 2 Rakdos Mid, 2 Izzet Phoenix, 2 Amalia combo, and 2 Blue-White Control decks. Dreamhack also had listed out here that there were 3 Rakdos Mid decks here when you look at the graphics for their top 8 bracket that went out on Twitter. So there's a little typo there. There was actually 2 of each deck from what I saw on MTG Melee. The tournament was won by Daniel Weiser on Blue-White Control.
Mazel tov,
Daniel. Twitter drama number 1 of the weekend involved, I don't know, some kind of replay involving Daniel.
Some kind of replay.
I'm going to move on from that. I'm just going to note it and move on. I thought it would be interesting for us to take a look at the way that these builds compare to each other, since there was 2 of each of the 4 decks that were in the top 8. And I actually think there are some little stories that explain, or at least are kind of symbols of what was going on in the tournament at large here in this, if we compare these to each other. So let's start with Rack Mid. Rack Mid was played by 2 different players in the top 8, Paul Green and Anna Wagner. Pretty interesting difference in the 2 builds here, actually. And it feels like maybe there might be 2 different directions to go with Rakdos, and it's something that I think people have intimated as they started to play with Smuggler's Copter. One is that we're going to really lower the curve, okay? And we're only going to have a couple of cards above 2 mana value in the creature slot. That is Paul Green's list, which included 4 Inti. It included 4 Blood Tithe Harvester. It included 3 Copters. It also included the only things that were above 2 mana value in the creature slot were 2 Sheoldred, 2 Graveyard Trespasser, and 3 Giant. Why am I suddenly blanking on the name of the giant? Bone Crusher Giant. Yeah, Bone Crusher Giant. So only 5 cards that were 3 mana value or greater in that deck as far as the creature slots go. There was a Kroxa. There was a couple of other things in there that you could really use to... I basically think that this list was optimized to have a pretty good creature to be able to either be ready to crew Copter or to just be kind of more aggressive in general and make sure that you hit that curve of like Copter into a 3-drop or Fable of the Mirror Breaker, essentially. But Inti main in a deck like Rakdos was actually something I wasn't quite expecting, and it seemed like it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of some of the Inti deck on camera. I didn't watch a ton of coverage this weekend, but the stuff I did see like an Inti versus... I think a control matchup, and it's appealing for sure. Like it's doing a lot in that deck for sure. It's really pumping the small creatures into relevance more often. Like it's putting counters on like a Blood Tithe Harvester, which I think can get pretty strong pretty fast. It's a 3/2 right out of the gate.
Blood Tithe is, yeah.
Yeah, so getting counters on that is perfectly good. It churns you through your deck in like an interesting way. I think it's a potentially strong addition. It's definitely the way I would want to play the deck, of course, because it's more aggressive.
Yeah,
I know Paul personally.
I think I recognize him too.
He was a judge at Dice Dojo for a long time here in Chicago, and now eventually he moved, and as far as I know, he still lives in Colorado.
Oh, really?
Yeah, maybe it's you, Shane.
A neighbor. Hello, neighbor.
Hello, neighbor.
But Paul's a cool cat, and he was always a fantastic Magic player. And it was really exciting to kind of see him like go this deep into the tournament, just because he's nice and smart and talented.
Yeah,
I'd love to see it.
And on the other hand, Anna Wagner, or Wagener, I think went undefeated day one, if I'm remembering properly from what I saw on Twitter, was like 9-0 or something like that at the end of day one before we went to the 10th round, the 10th round that happens on literal day one versus metaphysical day one, I suppose, is the way that we think about that. The first round of day two is played at the end of day one. This deck was pretty different. It only had Blood Tithe Harvester and Bankbuster as 2-drops. So there were 2 Reckoner Bankbusters and 4 Blood Tithe Harvesters in this deck. And then it had 4 Bone Crusher Giants, 3 Graveyard Trustmasters, a Kroxa, which I guess is a 2-drop technically speaking, Shieldred, and Archfiend of the Dross as the creature suite. Now, there was only 2 Shieldred and 1 Archfiend. Archfiend of the Dross just straight up getting played for value. Shane, something that you talked about at the time of the spoiler episode where I was like, I don't know if this card is like really okay to just play on rate. People are just playing this card on rate, and there it is.
The evil bunny corn.
Evil bunny corn. Other than that, one of the main things to keep in mind is that Anna's list also had a bit more interaction overall, 10 spells basically, where as opposed to, I think that Paul's list, I'm looking at it right now, only really had 7 non-discard spells. And but it was interesting. One is a little bit higher curve, one's a little bit lower curve, and it's these kind of two ends of the Rakdos kind of spectrum. And I guess maybe all of us were expecting a little bit more of an impact out of Smuggler's Copter, given how popular it was and the challenges coming up to this. And Shane, I know we're going to talk about this later, but it just kind of shows that it's possible for people to adjust Rakdos, even if it's all mid-range, to a style that maybe they feel comfortable with for attacking the meta.
Yeah, I think players who are serious about Rakdos mid are going to likely want to dig into these deck lists and look at the construction of them. Because, not to spoil anything, but even with the advances in Rakdos and the prevalence that it had in the metagame and day 2, it still was like a 49.5% deck.
Yeah.
So I'm curious which variants, if any, if either, kind of was doing better than the other. Like the Copterless Rakdos, was that doing worse, or was these Inti variants, were they particularly strong? Is there enough sample size to really make a decision? So that's something that I'm sure people will be doing in the near future.
Well, my hunch is that Paul's build, because it's shaving on some interaction to have more threats and more copters, part of me wonders whether this is tuned to deal with more mirror matches and Phoenix and control decks where, you've recognized that your threats are going to be contested very frequently by the most popular decks in the metagame for the most part, and being able to continuously apply pressure with something like Copter while also filtering your hand for either more threats or whatever interaction needs to line up for you to kind of turn the corner. It is almost like a more of a metagame choice than what Anna's playing, which is a little bit more traditional, I think, and probably just the proven cards that have been good in Rakdos for a really long time at this point.
I will say, digging through the top 75 decks quickly on Melee, the only one of the 6 or so was a classic list. The new ones are all these ones here are running 3 to 4 inties. So this may be the direction in which we see the deck skew a little bit in the near future, at least.
It's Inti and Copter versus one that only had Bankbuster, kind of.
Yeah.
And a higher curve. Interesting.
That's cool. It's a new version, and that's definitely a version of a more aggressive Rakdos deck that speaks to me. You're doing more stuff with your cards, you're doing more stuff with your deck. You're not just playing kind of the classic mid-range strategy that Rakdos has typically presented, and that definitely is something that intrigues me about the format. And reinventing a deck like Rakdos Midrange is really something. If that's really all we get out of Smuggler's Copter and Inti, then that's something for sure. To take a deck that's been around in its current fashion since Shieldred and before, so it's over a year and a quarter now, then sweet. I love it.
Yeah, just think about the big thing. I think the big slightly forgotten thing about Inti is it gains trample until end of turn. That's part of what's going on here. And so some of the bigger creatures that sneak their way into this build, or what you make it, that's your evasion that happens from this. Even, Paul's list even has 3 Kroxa, and Anna's only has 1. And so if you get to that kind of later on game where you get a Kroxa back out in the world and you give it trample, I imagine that's pretty good. Shieldred with trample is pretty reasonable just to make the deck more aggressive over time. But anyway, maybe that's enough for Rakdos Mid. Let's take a look at Is It Phoenix. Is It Phoenix was one of the other most popular decks, of course. Here's the thing. The list by Robert King and Mark Stanton, pretty much the same. Same creature list. They had Phoenix, Shredder, and Picklock Prankster. Neither one of these players was running Thing in the Ice or anything kind of strange in that particular Is It Phoenix creature suite. They're also running Crews, 4 Crews, 4 Sleight of Hand, and a Temporal Trespass. However, the instant interaction suites are pretty different. Robert King has a couple of Fading Hope, I'm assuming that's a bit to help against Amalia, cards that give things indestructible, basically. And maybe a little more of a 1 CMC answer against Shieldred as well. And then other than that, these decks just look like Phoenix. So I don't know if we have a ton to say about Phoenix in this sense, other than the fact that, the Grixis list that people were starting to experiment around with don't seem to have held up particularly well in this metagame environment. They had a much lower win rate than regular Phoenix. They were a much smaller share of the meta than the regular Phoenix. And so I think that this is probably just, it still kind of is its game to play as far as Phoenix goes.
Yeah, and not to spoil anything, but since I doubt we're going to talk much about it later, is, ostensibly you play something like Grixis Phoenix to get access to black removal, things like that. It's potentially going to be helpful against something like Amalia combo, and it did poorly against Amalia, like a 37% win rate. That's not where you want to be. It did even beat the mirror, which is also a place where I think you would want to be. So yeah, it might be kind of out.
Yeah, too cute by a little bit, maybe, huh?
I mean, I can't speak to that. I'm not. I think if you brought Phoenix to this, I'm assuming that you had practiced a lot, and I'm sure people tested Grixis, and it seems like many more people sort of went back to is it Phoenix if they ever had left in the first place. So
yeah. All right, let's move on to the next deck. The hype deck of the weekend, Amalia combo, of course.
Let's go.
Yeah, Shane, this is your thing that you are interested in. I will say that the two last lists between Robert Krankle and Adam Brace, they were nearly identical as far as this weekend goes. The main difference that I saw is that Robert Krankle had 4 Cenote Scout and Adam Brace had 2 Scout and 2 Sentinel of the Nameless City. So maybe...
Yeah, Sentinels was interesting. He was the only person I really saw play that.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of Sentinels elsewhere. I'm sure there were some.
It made me wonder if Adam was playing a little more of a hey, we're going to play a more balanced game with this, or not as all in on combo, just in case something happens. Maybe I can still have a 3-drop that gets me some card advantage and can attack in, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but
I kind of was thinking that as well. Here's just a good threat. Here's just a good card to have in there that's still actually... I don't remember the Explorer triggering event on it, but you can play it as a 3-drop, right? And then it explores for you versus a Cenote Scout.
Yes. I'm going to read it to you now just to make
please.
you have
I'm
to
all
listen
ears.
to it. Whenever Sentinel of the Nameless City enters the battlefield or attacks, create a map token. So, and it's a 3-mana 3/4 with Vigilance.
I don't like that as much. Although the map token makes sense because, early on, this is extremely obvious, I'm sure, for most people, but I was kind of like, why are we doing Gilded Goose things with this deck? And then I was like, oh, wait, the food token. So the food token is gain life on demand.
Right.
And then the map token is explore on demand.
Right.
But it's not a 1-drop. It's not also a mana advantage if needed, but similar idea. You don't have to get 3 creatures to get things going. You can just get the 2 and then pop the map token.
Yeah, I think it's just a somewhat more stout attacker and defender if you want to have that in your deck for more fair games, like I was saying. The sideboard's a little different. Adam had 2 Voice of Resurgence and Shaper's Sanctuary. Robert has a few other protection pieces instead, like Guardian of Faith, and also included 3 copies of Fatal Push. But it really feels to me like this deck has started to coalesce a lot more over the last couple of weeks since the last time that we talked. Both of them have Dina Soul Steeper in the deck as a one-of. I don't think that was in every single deck that we looked at last time. The 4 Gilded Goose thing, like you said, that wasn't there before, but it's nice. You can ramp, and you can also have life gain on demand if you want to from the food tokens. And then everything else, I think, is starting to really clear up, with the other big thing being that most people have finally started playing Cenote Scout all the time, and that was a little bit all over the place when I tried this deck originally as well. Then you have 3 Return to the Ranks, 4 Court of Calling, 4 Collected Company, and that is the deck.
Yeah, I think 3 seems like the number people have decided on for return. It's you want to draw maybe exactly 1, and because of the way the combo works, you could just effectively scry it to the top, explore it to the top. So I think 3 makes perfect sense here.
Yep. All right, finally, the last deck that was in the top 4, Azorius Control. What?
I mean, this deck has good tech now. I mean, imagine I don't want to see temporary lockdown if I'm playing Amalia. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to see the type of removal and sweepers. And we know that you can rebuild from certain types of sweepers. But yeah, I mean, this deck, especially right now, I think had a window where the people that are playing this deck could probably predict the top 5 to 7 decks and just be like, look, I've got a core strategy and then a sideboard that's going to shore up these matchups and go to town.
Yeah, and it's unbelievable. I mean, blue-white, here's a couple things real quick. There was actually a pretty big difference between these two decks that were in the top 8, and the big difference was the deck that won had Yorion as a companion, and the other one did not. And so basically every time I feel like we are making our way out of that companion induced hell of March 2020, we get pulled back in, and here we are again. Yorion, making it happen. So the decks are pretty different from each other because of that. You know, like, of course, Daniel's deck had room for things like 4 Omen of the Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you can't play that in a deck that doesn't have Yorion. You wouldn't really want to, but in a deck that has Yorion, you want it. So it's a pretty big difference between these two. But the big thing to me, and Shane pointed it out, is I really think that its temporary lockdown is just an extremely good card when you look at the meta across, I think, all these other decks, especially if Rakdos is lowering its curve enough to be able to have some stuff that's lower. I mean, it gets rid of 3 or less permanents, so it kind of gets rid of all the permanents in Rakdos regardless. But I think if you're aggressive and don't have slightly bigger creatures, it kind of hits it. What is it?
It is 2 or less. 2 or less.
Oh, it's 2 or less.
If it was 3 or less, that would be one of the best pieces of removal ever printed.
I think it's still one of the best, at least for Pioneer. At least for Pioneer. So sorry for that misremembering on my
I don't want the
brain.
angry comments, David.
Yes, no, you got it. So temporary lockdown is if Rakdos is lowering its curve, which it seems like most of the people are doing, temporary lockdown becomes good against them. It's good against Amalia combo. It's good against Convoke. It's good against so many different things that it just feels like that was a huge contributing factor to why Azorius did well this weekend.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this, and again, I'm probably jumping the gun a little bit, but I think that the resurgence of Azorius control was likely a surprise to a number of people. Like, I think that I'm sure a lot of opponents were not expecting to see, what was it, like 11% control?
It was 8.4% control.
Yes, 11%, like
day
I said.
Day 1. And then, day 2 was almost 12%.
Okay. Yes, I mean, like, even 9% is a lot, right? And so, like, you're kind of hedging your bets. You're like, well, maybe it's going to fall off after the removal of the combo decks. And then people come with 4 temporary lockdowns and a pile of other removal and sweepers. And you're like, well, dang, this sucks. And yeah. I think, but again, I think that this is something that some people, I think, can at least strike back against. Like, you have a few more enchantment removals for a temporary lockdown or something like that. And yeah, I think that thankfully, Pioneer is still a place where nothing's too ridiculously overpowered in terms of the technology that it can't be fought against. So this is the beginning, I think, of a interesting, if people are going to pay attention to the format, an interesting way of the meta sort of to begin a reset.
Yeah. And I'm just going to get into like our next section here. So the big we had a bunch of takeaways based on Frank Carson's study of win rates, talking about blue-white control in particular here. It was positive against, other than itself, 5 of the other 6 decks that it was seeing that were at the top of the metagame. So it was 55% against Rakdos Midrange, 68% against Amalia combo, 66% against Boros Convoke, 62% against Rakdos Sacrifice, and 51% against Lotus Field combo. That was a pretty small sample size in itself. The only of the top decks that Azorius control was losing to was Izzet Phoenix with a 39% win rate against. And I think that that's really all propped up by being able to run and have sweepers be pretty good and also have temporary lockdown be very good against, 4 of those decks. It's good against Sacrifice, it's good against Convoke, it's good against Amalia, and it's good against Rakdos Midrange with a lower curve.
Yeah, and basically none of these decks have incredible ways to get rid of them. Like, of course, there are ways to get rid of like something like temporary lockdown at least, but have you lost so much at that point? And can you do it fast enough that the opponent can not just counter magic it the next time they untap or something like that? So
yeah, so that was good for a 59.6% overall win rate,
that's incredible.
Which is huge in a tournament this big. Almost 60% with the number of people that brought that deck is absurd. All right, next point from this. Why don't we go with the other winner for now? Amalia.
Yeah.
Amalia had a 56.7% win rate, and it was the second most played deck, as it turned out. Yeah.
I mean, and here's the funny thing. We're not going to get into the nuances of this particular conversation online, but I bet you more people would have run it if they could have had all the cards in hand. I think people were, there's some discourse on the internet about acquisition issues.
Yeah.
But even the discourse aside, like people had about 2 weeks to select a deck for this tournament because of the bans, and like it can be hard to just build a deck on such short notice, no matter how good the vendors are.
Yes, I mean, I'm thinking more about like I'm thinking one. I think that there would have been more people on it, which means that like I think people were likely predicting that people were going to be on it and had tech against it, or should have had tech against it, and it still pulled off like a nearly 57% win rate, which is surprising to me, honestly. I thought it was going to be like a 52% deck and be like, hey, here's a new option in Pioneer, as opposed to like this may be the new
Hogak.
This is the new. Not quite okay. That's Convoke, my friend.
Okay.
This is kind of the new potential check. Like, this is sort of a potential removal check. It's a potential interaction check.
Oh, the new mono green devotion.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
gross.
Perfect.
Here's what it feasted on, though. It was 60% against Is It Phoenix. It was 81% against Convoke. Amalia went 61 and 14 against Convoke in those matchups, and it was 62% against Lotus Field.
Who knew gaining like 90 life was enough?
Yeah, and then that's not even all of its plus 50% matchups. It also won 53% of its games against Rakdos Midrange and won 52% of its games against Rakdos Sacrifice. The only deck out of this end of the spectrum that it won against, or that it lost against, was Azorius Control, which it had a 32% win rate against Azorius Control, as we kind of hinted to earlier when we were talking about Azorius. Yep. Deck's good.
It's a good deck.
However, bad against blue-white if people are playing a bunch of blue-white.
Yeah, I think that people, like I mentioned, I think there's some options here. Like I wouldn't be surprised to see more of like that flash spirit that like blinks all your creatures out of the way. What's that called?
Guardian of Faith, yeah.
Yeah, that one. Some Guardian of Faith stuff, some enchantment removal stuff. I wouldn't be surprised to see some options creep into the sideboard, because all these sideboards from Amalia were like these very toolbox creature-y strategies, and they were, of course, tuned, I think, to less of a Azorius Control meta. So you tune a little bit the other way and shore that up a little bit and see what happens.
Would you like to hear some of the other decks that combo did well against, just because I'm looking right now?
Please.
It had a 62% win rate against Gruul Vehicles. I'm reading the inverse right now. So it had a 73% against Selesnya Angels. It had a 58% against Azorius Spirits. That was only 12 matches. It had an 81% win rate against Mono White Humans.
Whew.
It's brutal. It had a 73% win rate against Abzan Greasefang.
Yeah, I think the potential issue here, if you want to call it that, is like, will this push effectively every other creature deck somewhat out of the meta, besides like Rack Mid or like a Rack Aggro or something like that? You know what I mean? Where it's just like it's almost like Thing in the Ice back in like the early Is It Phoenix days, right? Where it's like, what can I play into this board when it's going to get upheavaled? And similarly, it's like, what can I play into this board that's going to get Amalia destroyed?
Right.
So
I guess we'll see. I didn't see what actually happened with a lot. Was there an absurd number of draws with this deck, as we kind of like theorize that there might be? It doesn't really look like there were.
No, I don't. I think the fear was more about like not like draws, like go to time draws. I think it was more like intra match draws, and I didn't hear anything. Thankfully, I mean, I also try not to look at Magic Twitter, so I didn't hear any discourse related to that. But I think all of the kerfluffle early on, where it was like, here's the official tournament rule set about what happens when you draw, and like, if your opponent has removal, then this happens, and blah blah blah. And like, I don't really think that ended up being anything that most people really had to care about.
Yeah, it didn't look like it. Although, yeah, there's some people with some wild results. There's Michael Braverman on Is It Phoenix, finishing 113th place, 8-3-3. 8-3-3.
They were trying to ID into the top 8.
I feel like there's some IDs in there. Anyway, okay. Amalia was the other big one. Okay, next thing from here becomes that perennial rogue deck, Enigmatic Fires, just beat the hell out of Rakdos.
That's what it does.
And it did it again. 79% win rate against Rakdos Rid.
Rakdos Rid?
Rakdos Rid.
How was the Azorius Control matchup?
For that?
Yeah, if you didn't already say. Yeah, I didn't think so. I was just curious if it also had like a secretly good match against that too or something.
No, and I think in fact a lot of people sort of have posited or hypothesized that part of the reason that Azorius Control actually did so well is also because it does well against Fires and Amalia. And
Yeah,
so it
sure
was
does.
sort of like those decks, Fires and Amalia did well against everything else that wasn't Azorius, and then Azorius did well against those two. And so it kind of had an opportunity to rise its way up the ranks on day 2.
I mean, I don't know. Azorius Control looked like it did really well against everything except for Is It Phoenix in this match, in this tournament.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it was just killing it. All right, so Enigmatic Fires is a deck to look at, except for the fact that it also is terrible against control. There's no aggro decks in this format is the next thing that I was looking at right now.
Creatures
the way that
die.
it looks right now, Creatures Die. Convoke turned out to be really bad against every single one of the top decks. It was 45% against Rakdos Mid, 19% against Amalia, 50% against Phoenix, 34% against Control, and then it had a couple of reasonable matchups against Sack and Lotus, but...
Now, when we talk about aggro decks, you're specifically referring to like 1 drops and 2 drops that are turning sideways. Like Phoenix isn't aggressive enough for you because it's just a mid-range easy rocks deck.
Yeah, I think it's more. I think it's a tempo deck.
Well,
Stan,
I don't think that's true, but
you don't think so? Just like it's kind of like a spell board control deck, and then you get your playoffs out and you kind of attack with them later.
yeah, I just don't think that. I think that's more mid-range than tempo, but that's a different episode, isn't it?
Sure, sure, but you don't think Is It Phoenix is aggro either, right?
I guess I always thought it, but now maybe not, because you're not playing threats on turn 1 and 2.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking back to the early days of like modern Phoenix, and I feel like it's playing really a lot like the best version of that deck that it could.
Yes,
but it's still nowhere near as explosive because of the lack of faithless looting. So, but in the environment of modern, in the Pioneer, I agree with Dave. No, I agree with you, Stan. Did you say it was mid-range, or did you say it was aggressive?
He said it was mid-range, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's way more of like a mid-range value deck where it's like, you're casting a lightning axe and getting value out of it. Like, the 1 mana 5 damage removal and then getting something back out of it on the other side. And that's something that only Phoenix can really do well. So
yeah, I think it's like Death Shadow. So that's why I think of it as tempo.
Yeah, that's a good
whatever.
point. I mean, it's in that. I mean, Death Shadow is also like a tempo-y mid-range deck, right? Where it's like, I'm gonna get myself to a state where I kill you, and I think Phoenix is similar, right?
Right. So anyway, Convoke was bad. There's no other aggro deck that really fits in there. And then Greasefang was extremely bad. It was 30% against Rakdos Mid, 27% against Amalia, 46% against Phoenix, and 26% against Control. It just wasn't good against any of the top 4 decks that people registered this weekend. And guess what? A whole bunch of the meta was just not good. Rakdos Mid was below 50%. Gruul was below 50%. Racksack, Lotus, Convoke, Grixis Phoenix, Humans, and as I mentioned, Greasefang, they were all below 50%. That was 43.5% of the day 1 meta. That was all entirely below 50%. Also, most of these decks were not most of these. These decks are inclusive of the decks that mostly played Smuggler's Copter as well, and all of them were kind of below 50%.
Yeah. I mean, Copter overall was weird to me. Right? If we're ready to move on to that, I think sure. It's wild to me that like Goldfish had it as like the 5th most played card in the tournament. Like it was in 24% of the decks, like a quarter of the field was playing some number of Copter, but like it was really fairly narrow in its application, right? Like Rakdos Mid in some amount. I think probably most Rakdos mid-range decks were likely playing it. And then Racksack had some amount, Gruul Vehicles, and then like Azorius Spirits and, rogue mono black decks, but like it wasn't in any potential homes that we talked about post unban, like Convoke or Greasefang, or even like random potential decks like Humans or anything like that. Like Copter was only in 5 decks of the top 32, and one of those was a mono black aggro deck. Let's go. And then only 7 decks of the top 64, and so like those were like all Rakdos mid-range decks besides the black deck. And 7 out of the top 64 is nothing, like it's not earth-shattering, right? Like we're not blowing the doors off the tournament hall with like our Copters buzzing around them. This is a strained metaphor. Like, I mean, I think, Copter looks like a safe unban to me, but like surprisingly, like almost like a dull one. Like I guess reinventing Rakdos Mid potentially is not that dull, but it's not like it really moved the needle on the deck. Like I said before, like it still looked like a 50% deck, and Gruul Vehicles and Racksack were like just under 50, and like Spirits, who players are using it, were like 47%. So overall, it's like it's it's like another card and not, I think, the powerhouse that it was when it was banned, which is a good thing, right? Potentially. I mean, I'm also saying that in an Amalia environment, right? Like but these decks weren't playing it in the first place. Like, it's not like Humans was playing Copter or something like that, or Greasefang was playing Copter, or Convoke was playing Copter and just stunk. It's like they just were like, this is not the home for this deck. So,
Right. Yeah.
I just feel like the format was so different when Copter was first banned too. Like, aggro decks were good. And here we are talking about how like none of the aggro decks were even 50% good.
Yeah, the aggro decks were good, and we had more broken tools at lower mana values. So, like, we were playing like Simic aggro with like Oko and Copter and stuff like that. And just there were a lot of strategies, I think, that could use cards like that had other like just good stuff. And like you said, it's just decks like Control were nowhere near as good. Enigmatic Fires was like not a thing. So it was like board state the format, and Copter could really take advantage of that.
In fact, here's my fanning the flame. If anything, these Copter versions of Rakdos Mid that are lowering their curve and sometimes increasing their threat count, I think that's venturing more into tempo deck territory and like further away from mid-range deck territory, because it's about these lower threats that are doing more work for you, and then you're playing a lot of 1-for-1 cards that are kind of just like sacrificing card advantage in order to just slow down your opponent, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally true. I also think that it had this weird side problem of making it more susceptible to blue-white control, like we talked about earlier. And so suddenly something that was maybe a reasonable matchup for Rakdos has kind of slid over to being kind of not reasonable anymore.
But isn't control historically good against midrange in the paper, scissors, rocks of Magic archetypes?
I think that's the way people talk about it all the time, but I think that aggro is the thing that's supposed to be good against control, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Control is good against midrange, and aggro is good against control. But we don't have any good aggro deck.
Right. So it's just falling apart.
Yeah.
I think it made it worse. By trying to make Rakdos more aggressive slightly, it made it worse against control just because of the unique removal suite that's available to control right now.
It's the Wandering Emperor's fault and Teferi's.
Yeah, I think it's temporary lockdown's fault is what I mean.
Oh, that too.
I mean, who knew that slowly adding pieces to a control deck would eventually make it okay?
I mean, there have been plenty of moments where blue-eye control has been not good in Pioneer for random reasons, and so I'm not going to get like too upset about what's going on right now.
I am. I don't want to have a reason to play against like blue-eye control at the LGS, but I guess I can just scoop early if I want to.
I mean, as soon as they show you Yorion, just head out for a drink.
I'm going to get some empanadas next door.
That's it. What do we think about this meta?
So I want to ask a quick question about like how so many of the decks are below 50%. When you look at any average tournament, do you have to have like a clear divide of like some decks are below 50, some decks are above 50, or can you have disproportionate numbers where, maybe like at least 60% of the field is below 50% win rate because you have an overrepresentation of something like control in this instance that is good against everything. So you have one or two archetypes that are kind of like absorbing the positive win rate from everybody else.
Yeah, for the first thought, you were asking if we could bend the rules of math about can there be more players at below 50 than above 50, and no, we cannot. But I think that's exactly what we see happen. I think in most tournaments, I think modern Pioneer is that if there's usually like a few things that are kind of above 50, and then kind of they might be the most known and powerful decks, right? Where it's like Scam's 54%, 56%, and it's like 20% of the room. Or Amalia and Azorius Control are like 25% together-ish, and they're at like 57 to 62%, right? And those can really suck a lot of air out of the win rates of the room. Like I think you insinuated, right?
So like, is there anything that we can extrapolate about format health, or maybe just like format identity, based on the fact that like a lot of these decks, like, is it the fact that a lot of these decks aren't actually that good, or is it the fact that in this one tournament, Azorius Control was so good that it made everything else look worse than it really is?
Yeah, I think people better prepare for Azorius Control in whatever way they can. I don't truly know what that is, right? Like, I don't know how you prepare against control decks particularly well. I mean, you can't, it's hard because you can't lower your curve into this because you'll just get eaten up by like Amalia, right? Like, you can't play like an aggressive creature deck into Amalia very well. And so that's going to be tough. I think like,
it was also very good against the good aggressive creature deck.
yeah, I mean, that's interesting too, right? And it's like, if it's not killing you fast enough, having a 3 mana sweeper is a lot, right? Like, if you're saying like, I'm going to play 1 and 2 mana creatures and try to convoke you out, and that gets cleaned up pretty reliably with temporary lockdown perhaps, or other types of tools. If you can't get them dead on turn 3 or turn 4, then you're also facing up against like Amalia decks, like I mentioned. It's like, what are you meant to do there? And
so there were very few decks that were above 50% against Azorius Control. Would you like to hear what they were?
Please.
Yes. Just out of curiosity.
What are we gonna say? No.
Well, yeah, say no. Boros Heroic went 4-3 against Azorius Control.
Sample size.
Not a great sample size. Is It Phoenix went 55-34 for 62% win rate. And then the other one is Azorius Spirits. Actually was above 50% against Azorius Control, again with a 6-5 record. So a very small sample size as well. But I do think that one thing that's weird about those decks is like, actually, I mean, Phoenix, obviously it's running on a whole different axis as far as like being able to assert itself, like we talked about earlier. Boros Heroic and Azorius Spirits, like, I guess Spirits can be able to spell queller Supreme Verdict or temporary lockdown and be able to get around that somewhat in time with big enough threats to be able to kill people. And then Boros Heroic, maybe it's able to run God's Willing and some of the other kind of disruption effects that could help it stay online against that. It said, I feel like that one's probably not a real sample size, but I mean, every single deck on the list against Azorius Control, other than really Is It Phoenix, was sub 50%.
Does this format look better post bans? Like, are we more interested in a format where instead of worrying about mono green devotion, let's even take Geological Appraiser out of the conversation. Let's assume that never happened and the bannings really just shut down mono green above all else. And now we have like Control, Amalia, Phoenix, and Rakdos as kind of like these 4 principal decks. And maybe like you can add Lotus Combo as this other really popular combo strategy that isn't as popular because maybe it's tough to play or unfun. Is that an interesting format to you? Does any part of you like miss what Mono Green Devotion brought to the table?
No.
I don't know if I miss what Mono Green Devotion brought to the table, but the combination of, the Mono Green Devotion getting nerfed and Amalia's rise to prominence, and like, as much as I am hyped to play Amalia, like, I'm actually like at the worst time probably ever. I'm like, man, I want to go to the LGS like Pioneer nights and just like have some fun. But I do have concerns the more we've talked about it that Amalia might apply some kind of pressures to the overall meta that are going to make it a smaller format. And that's not necessarily worse, right? It's not necessarily worse to have a smaller format. And in fact, it might make it more like standard, where it's like, hey, like, I'm really tuning things for like my expected meta. I want to have the right sideboard tools. I'm going to have my matchups really on lockdown. And that can be perfectly fun, right? I've when I've enjoyed standard, it's been my consideration. But for a format like Pioneer, shrinking it can be dangerous because of the power levels that we have versus standard. And so it will make certain things perhaps unable to be attacked as well when you have, like, maybe let's just call Amalia and Control right now like the twin towers of the format, and they oppress things in slightly different ways, and maybe they're oppressing things. And by twin towers, I'm referring to like the wrestlers. I'm trying to remember who they were. Not the buildings that fell.
Yeah,
9/11,
yeah.
forget.
Shane, I'm never going to forget that analogy.
But I mean, I guess you see where I'm going, right? Which is just like, I have concern about Amalia applying significant amounts of pressure on ways that people are able to attack other decks. But we'll see how realistic that is, as people now have to respect Amalia even more than they did before.
Yeah. Amalia is such an interesting story because I think people sort of expected it to be a victim of its own success, that this creature combo deck strategy should be easy to hate out, and probably even soft in a field full of Phoenix, which everyone knew Phoenix would be popular. And it just kind of proved everyone wrong with its resilience. And that sort of, I think, indicated to us in this one tournament that apart from what Control brings to the table, which I think is a lot of baked-in exile effects, basic on-your-face removal is not how to fight Amalia combo. Like, you need to have a plan to actually attack their graveyard as much as you need to have a plan to attack their board.
Yeah, I just think we don't know what's happening yet. Like, that's the bottom line, really. And I
David, I'm
think
telling you what's happening.
yeah,
Deal
it's
with
just
the
the
graveyards.
beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's something people will try. Yeah, I just think that it's like, okay, as people realize it's a control-centric moment right now, like what's going to happen to try to combat that? I think there's just a lot that could happen still. So I don't miss mono green in that sense, just because it's like mono green was there for a long time and it was maybe keeping some of this, like the way the meta is evolving now, from happening. So
yeah.
I think we should move on.
Yeah, interesting tournament. Pioneer, I think, is reinventing itself at perhaps the worst time for eyes to be on it, but I think, the true heads will still keep playing it, and it's honestly the format I'm most interested in playing right now. So we'll see if I actually do it. But Dave, what do we have next?
Let's take a short break, and we'll be right back with a fun wind down after that unbelievable hour of content on Pioneer. Stay with us. Hey, what's your New Year's resolution, Stan?
To smell better, David.
I had a feeling. How are you going to accomplish that, though?
You know what? First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make this cherry cardamom cookie recipe that is listed on Barrister and Man's blog. And first, I'm going to make the house smell good.
Yeah. Start with your house and work your way to your insides. I love it.
That's right. And then once I've decided that the house smells good, then I'm going to use some of this Dickens revisited fragrance on different parts of my body.
Oh, it's a remastered set.
Mm-hmm. Does that mean it's $12.99 a pack, or?
Well, in fact, Dave, it's $24.99 for a tub of shaving soap, and I'm sure other products. I like that it needed a rework. Dickens needed an update.
Mm-hmm.
They had to rework that cherry.
We had to rework the Dickens a little.
Stans, tell me about Dickens, because I think you were eyeballing it.
It is, in fact, patterned after one of Will from Barrister and Man, his favorite cookies, and it contains notes of cherry, black pepper, nutmeg, cardamom, our old friend, and lemon in a very spicy, merry, festive scent, perfect for a shave before fighting hordes of shoppers or opening presents on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, or whatever holiday you're enjoying this December.
Amazing. Well, Stan, thank you so much for coming to your Smell Review 2023. I look forward to seeing improved performance in 2024. And if you would like to have improved smell performance in 2024, please go to barristerandman.com. Use code THEDIVEDOWN23, spelled out. That's only going to be around for a little bit longer, to get 15% off your first order. Stan, I had one last question. What does cardamom evolve to in a stage 2 evolution?
Cardamarol.
All right, we're back. It's the end of the year. We used to do wind downs many episodes and do random stuff at the end of these. And here we are. We're fitting one in for all of 2023, I think.
So in anticipation of this segment, I thought it would have been fun to do something called 2023, a year of discourse, and try to recap as much of the Twitter drama of 2023 as possible.
No.
It was a Herculean and thus impossible task that I
did you actually start trying to list things out?
Yeah, after about 20 minutes I was like, I can't do this.
No, it's not worth the effort.
You didn't even get out of the first 2 weeks of January 2023.
That's right. It was just too many tweets to uncover, too many disparate podcast episodes to try to hunt down and listen to when they don't have timestamps.
Stan, you want to tell me what your favorite? What was your favorite part of Magic this year? If you have one or two, or like me, 6.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty much all limited to my competitive performance and highlights therein.
So when you did well, you that was your favorite. Weird.
I top 8'd a couple RCQs in Modern and Pioneer. That's fun.
That's amazing.
There was also, the first half of the year, I barely played any paper Magic whatsoever. I just did not have the bandwidth or the time and or the means to bounce around little hamlets in northern England to compete with those strangers
with the round doors and the hairy feet.
But then you got a bike, right? And then you could bike around on all the country roads.
That's right. But
take them home.
I can't, at this point, I don't remember what month it was, but it was during Pioneer RCQ season. And I made arrangements to go to play like a modern win-a-box. So it was Comp REL, but, you know, the stakes are just like better than pity packs or whatever. It was my first time playing Paper Modern in a year. It had been what felt like at least 6 months since I've basically played any Modern whatsoever. And I top 8'd that. And there was like this cool moment of like, I still got it. And that kind of actually got me back into the momentum of hitting up RCQs and like chasing the dream a little bit. So that was nice that in what was ultimately kind of like a year of many changes for me in my private life because I moved continents. Magic didn't necessarily like suffer and in some cases was still there for me as like a really important hobby and outlet and way to kind of have fun and connect with people while still making myself proud every once in a while.
Yeah, sometimes playing Magic can be fun.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a pretty good year of like Modern and Pioneer in the end. Like, I thought there was a lot of stuff that happened this year. Like, you know, just in terms of the game overall, like the stuff we got to cover was pretty fun, I thought. Like, we had like, I still remember like the early hype around like Tyvar, and like that had a lot of experimentation behind it for a little while. Then like nothing really panned out. But like, you know, I played a Golgari sack deck at Pioneer LGS night. It was fun. Like, you know, we had some big shifts in Modern with like Lord of the Rings. We got to talk about the One Ring for like 3 episodes in a row. We had a really good Modern PT. I thought like that was my favorite part of the year. I thought like that Modern PT was really well covered, really enjoyable matchups.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you, Shane, that I think that the whole Lord of the Ring cycle, playing with those cards for the first time, going into the Pro Tour was probably my favorite part of Magic over the last 12 months for me as well. Kind of just bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, we had Modern bans. We had some Pioneer stuff happen just like last week. Like I thought, you know, it was a good year. Like, you know, the Modern PT for me too. Like I was, you know, hanging out with Doomwake on a stream. We were like, you know, co-commentating it. Like that's the kind of stuff that I think is fun. You know, it's just fun to like have a good community event and have something we could discourse about for a few weeks afterwards and make people think Tron was good again, stuff like that.
You know, I didn't mention that just occurred to me while you were talking. This was the year I learned to love Pioneer.
You did have a thaw in your Pioneer love attitude, your Pioneer attitude earlier this year. It's true.
Yeah, found some decks that I like to play and realized that the format can be interesting and engaging. David, and any other like personal moments within MTG this year that you look back on fondly?
I mean,
cards
I
you were excited about? Who's your Tyvar?
I mean, I like playing with Scam. I don't care. I like playing with Scam in Modern for a good amount of the year. I got a 5-0 with it, even though it was in a friendly league. That was pretty fun for me. I liked it.
I think
I liked
friendly leagues.
Those cards.
Good thing to be. They were added back this year, right?
They were.
That's a pretty good thing for me too. Honestly, is that I do feel like they're a little bit more my speed as far as gameplay goes, and I feel a lot more competitive there, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
So those are all good things.
I have a nomination.
Yeah.
For a different category.
Yeah, best new host of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to give a shout out to Devin O'Donnell, aka Doomwake, who's not here because he's under the weather. He was going to be on.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that he couldn't join us after his long weekend in Atlanta, but yeah.
I mean, I just don't really know how we would have made it through the year without Devin. But not only just making it through is like, I think like it's great to have a fourth voice on the podcast of someone who's engaged in Magic, you know, much more than we can be, and you know, made a bumpy schedule work. But I think also is someone who meshes with us enough that like I look forward to working with him on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know this about podcasting is that like, to be a good podcast, you have to have diversity in the frequency range of everyone's voices.
That's where you're coming at.
We had this gap in like a certain megahertz section.
Sure, that works.
And Devin just like nailed it.
It's perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to echo what you said though, Shane. I also am not sure we would have made it through this year without Devin being such a big part of the team, realistically bringing extra new perspective, but also just, things got busy for us, each of us in different times in different ways. And he was always excited to participate and join in. And so, yeah, definitely am glad that, I randomly played him in a sealed event in the Atlanta RC last year and talked to him afterwards, and he was interested in coming on because it's been a really good addition to the show, I think.
Yeah. And hopefully all y'all out there like the perspective as well.
Did you guys have any favorite episodes from this year, either as a listener or as a comment creator?
I mean, I'm a comment and a content creator. My comment here is I like the modern history episode, actually, because it was, I've never done anything like that. Basically, it was just like a short research project on like modern and a lot of stuff before I came back in Khan's era. And so it was nice to make an episode that, Will is someone that we've worked with a lot. We've engaged with a lot. He's a longtime patron and sponsor of the podcast. So it was cool to make an episode that he appreciated. And I think it was fun to do and talk through with you guys. How about you, buddy?
I'm not your buddy guy, but a couple that stood out to me were the episode we did with Ryan Spain about Magic Online without me. Under the Daybreak helm. Yeah.
Just a reiteration, if you missed that episode, like Ryan was one of the first people that I listened to that was a Magic podcaster. One of the first podcasts that I really got into was Limited Resources with him and Marshall. And so getting to talk with him was like literally a dream that I had since I was a young man of 30. But it's true. Like that's around, it's been 10 years or so that I would have loved to have talked with Ryan Spain. And so to get to talk with him was great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought he was really generous with his insights on like what it's like working on Magic Online, what the technology is like. And, he gave us a glimpse behind the scenes. And I thought that was really exciting and an opportunity that I don't know that we would have had if not for the dive down.
Yeah, that's really what I was going to say too, Stan, is like the opportunities that even doing our mid-level Magic the Gathering podcast affords us in terms of people to talk to, people who are willing to give us their time just to talk to us is always surprising and generous, and I think gives our listeners the opportunity to hear perspectives they wouldn't otherwise. So I'm always glad. Thank you, Ryan, and every guest we've had on the pod this year.
For what it's worth, one of my favorite episodes was talking about, this is a weird one, but talking about the Pioneer Pro Tour in Philly with Devin. It was an episode that was just me and him, and I think it was one of the first times that it was just me and him talking through something. And it was one where I got to put a little bit of time into trying to do the like way that I like to structure an episode, which is like 10 headlines about something, like don't go through just the meta, that kind of thing. That one kind of stands out for me as something I try to do whenever we write episodes now.
David, I remember that episode. I remember that was the episode where one of your headlines, if not the first headline, was Bone Crusher Giant is the best card in the format, and if you're in red, you need to be playing it.
It was actually Fable that I said was the best card in the format.
Fable.
But
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Dave, that makes me think I wanted to say too on this topic is I think that you actually, in particular, not to say anything against Stan or myself, is I think you got a lot better at content, I think, this year. Like, I think you made us think about things, especially me, because I think about things the same way a lot, right? Which is just like, I kind of will do the same episodes just with different content, and you ask questions that, I think are really good ones and have us think about and talk about stuff in ways that pushes it to a better place.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm just trying to make you all better. I'm just trying to make you better. Also, we did have some interesting stuff happen on YouTube this year. And I know that last episode I asked for two people to follow us on YouTube, and we got 115 people to follow us. And so I really want to say thanks to everybody. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the Lexus ads or whatever I'm playing on YouTube right now. We'll see. We might turn that monetization stuff back off if it turns out to be kind of a pain, but that kind of stuff. And Shane, I am starting to dip into content creation in my job as much as I can. And so being able to bring some perspective from what I've learned from the show has actually been really valuable. It's part of the reason that we tried video content. I found that very valuable, and I've been able to apply those lessons to things and client engagements that I have in my real life. Same thing with wanting to try to get into the YouTube partner tools is I just want to be able to know and have that perspective. And so hopefully it's not too annoying to people for now, and we'll see where it goes.
Dave, can you do another call to action? Like, join Patreon, buy a t-shirt.
To get 100 extra people. We just need 2 more patrons to be able to get to unlock something.
Since we only needed 2 YouTube subs, but we got over 100, like 98 of you can now actually unsubscribe. And
thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay.
No problem.
I have a favorite thing about the dive down this year. I think the moment I laughed the hardest as a listener was on episode 240, Woe Betides Modern and Pioneer. When it was during the cold open, you guys were talking about fantasy football with Devin, and Shane said,
"Hey, Blanco Neo, too bad your butt got sacked." Nothing like just referencing like a 20-plus-year-old internet video to make your friends laugh easily.
That's one of the legs of the three-legged stool that is the dive down.
Thanks, Dan. Sometimes it just comes to you. Let's talk about the card of the year. Let's get back to brass tacks. Let's talk about Magic again. Do you think there's like a card of the year? I'm going to start with you, Dave, because I think I know what Stan's is. And I know mine.
I'm just going to say my favorite card of the year. I'm not going to worry about the best.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be objective about it. I think my favorite card of the year is Orcish Bowmasters.
Mm-hmm.
Love it.
Yeah,
it's a card that I thought was cool when I read it. It turned out to be as good or better than I thought it was going to be. It went in the deck that I liked playing already. And so, I like it. Orcish Bowmasters, Dave's card of the year 2023.
It's not a bad pick. Stanislav.
Yeah, Bowmaster was on my list of nominees. My full list of nominees was Bowmasters, The One Ring, Agatha Soul Cauldron, Elish Norn, Atraxa Grand Unifier, and cheating a little bit, but I actually put Shieldred on the list, even though Shieldred was released last year, technically.
Yeah, September of last year.
And yet, I feel like this year was a big one for her, where she just every month just continued to prove how important she was in more and more formats. And I thought that was kind of impressive that like she probably had the biggest glow up of any other card in 2023. So maybe Shieldred.
I'm with you.
Maybe Shieldred's like my backdoor card of the year.
Yeah, her staying power is really impressive, like financially and power level, right? I mean, I know like a lot of cards last more than 15 months and are still good, but Shieldred I think has come on stronger, like you said, Stan, and found more homes.
Where are you at, Shane?
I think before Beans, I think it was a shoe-in for the One Ring, but then Beans like threw a weird like bean-shaped wrench into the One Ring's mechanisms. But I think I have to give it to Grief because of like a combination of like power level, the staying power of kind of Scam, and then all of the discussion that surrounded it. It was just kind of like the talk of Modern, which is basically Magic for us this year. And like we still have it in the format. Like it didn't get banned. It won a huge, it was part of the deck that won a huge paper tournament like 2 weeks ago. Like I think it's still something that's going to have an impact on the format and be a card that people have their eyes on.
That's funny, Shane, because, our next section, what's a card we would revoke from existence? Grief is actually still up there for me. Even though I probably think the One Ring is the objectively correct answer, Grief hurts me more than the One Ring ever has. And full disclosure, when I arrived to my parents' house a couple days ago, there was an envelope waiting for me with 4 copies of a full art Grief that I got after it was not banned. And yet, I say, get it out of here still.
You upgraded those nice normal art Griefs I sold to you months ago?
Yes.
Good.
I sold those.
You sold them when you thought they were going to get banned.
That's right. Yeah, I sold them in anticipation. Shane, to quote you, arbitrage, my friend, arbitrage.
Arbitrage, baby. I don't know if that's actually arbitrage or not, but it's perfectly good.
Is there anything you guys would revoke out of existence? Are you feeling good?
I don't know.
You guys aren't going to like my answer. You're not going to like my answer.
What is it?
Violent Outburst.
What?
It's time, baby.
It might
It's
be.
time.
It might be.
It's time.
It puts weird constraints on things, but get out of here.
Get rid of that. Leave Shardless Agent. I'm fine with that.
Dave, if you're going to say something so painful and is personal, can you explain yourself? Why has Violent Outburst been problematic to you?
I hate Cascade decks. I don't mind the play patterns of them. Like, I don't think they're bad decks in themselves, but I've always hated the fact that the way they work is the way they work. Like, it's not a particularly thinking Rhinos or Living End is like an awfully too powerful deck. I just don't like Cascade as a mechanic.
Well, I'm sorry, but they made it, so now we get to play with it.
That's fine. That's fine, but I'm just saying if I get to pick one, that's what I'm picking.
No, well, you can't pick that one.
Okay. You want me to pick something? Okay, I'll pick Shardless Agent.
Bro.
Wow.
WT, mate.
Sorry. I've become the villain.
I guess. It's just let cards be good. Let me have one. I've already lost Fury.
Yeah.
They're finally about
I
to
don't
give
think
us a
it's gonna
full art
happen.
Rhino. You know, it's like I'm this much closer to it being fully full art, non-foil Rhino deck. God.
It's a beautiful thing. Can't wait for that Rhino.
I just don't like a Cascade deck.
And I'm gonna storm off.
Okay.
Can I revoke you from Magic?
Probably.
Dave, from now on, when you make comments like that, you have to include in parentheses how many comp REL events you've played.
Oh, gosh. All right, let's move on. Do we want to talk about some non-Magic stuff, or do we want to talk about how we feel about Magic? Like, what do you guys want to do?
I got enough. I mean,
This is enough Magic stuff, right?
it's enough. I mean, Magic's still exactly what it needs to be for everybody. That's a good thing about Magic, right?
A cash cow? Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Do we talk about the podcast? Are we going to reiterate the fact that we're going to have some kind of party in Chicago in February? You guys want to promote
keep
that
dropping
here somewhere?
breadcrumbs till we get there.
Sure.
Soon. We're going to have some details soon for people, I know. And we don't expect a lot of people to show up to this, but it is going to be like a little 5-year anniversary of the dive down here in Chicago. We'll figure something out.
Yeah, we'll get a space. We'll just go there on, Friday's the party, Saturday. I mean, Friday's the after party. Saturday can be we're going here, show up if you want to type thing.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Is Kaiser Tiger still open?
Yes, we could maybe go to Kaiser Tiger.
That could work.
Keep your Saturdays open, friends.
Yeah.
Should we take everyone to Au Cheval?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. I only do small cheval with people from out of town.
All right, non-MTG. Let's get in the actual fun stuff because we're like what, an hour 35-ish.
We are
now?
deeper in this episode than I thought we would be, but of course,
right.
Of course.
Stan, did you pick all these categories, Stanislav?
No.
I did.
This is David. David, walk us through this. It seems like you wanted to talk about some media.
I just wanted to have fun with media because that's one of the best things about the Dive Down Discord. Actually, it's one of the best and worst things, but I do like
this off-topic area.
Yeah, but I like learning about what other people like. I have discovered some cool things from what people talked about in the Dive Down Discord, so I thought it would be fun for us to just share with some people stuff that we've enjoyed this year that's not Magic related. You can turn off your podcast now. We don't put this at the front of the podcast, so you have to sit through it wondering when we're going to talk about Pioneer. Just turn it off now if you don't care what album I liked.
Then why are you listening to us if you don't want to hear us talk about stuff?
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about music first. We can keep it fast. You got what is an album that you really liked this year, Stan? What helped you get through?
Homecoming by Dablon.
Mm-hmm.
It's from 2021. It's not a new album, but it was an artist that was new to me, and I just got into her work in a big way. And Homecoming was like the album that really solidified my appreciation of her, and just I've not gotten tired of it since, after like 6 months of just listening to it a ton.
That's awesome. Shane, nothing? Any album that you've added to rotation? You made a joke here in the notes that you're old and only listen to old things, but that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I'm sort of making more of an effort to. I did two things. I listened to like 30 albums and mostly EPs from this electronic label from the late 90s to, I think they went pretty far deep.
Is it Fax?
It is. Fax is really good, but it is more music, MORR. And sure. I was just, I'm going to listen to everything they did in chronological order. And I found some stuff that wasn't as good as I remember and some stuff that was better than I remember. It's all like kind of melodic, electronic, IDM-ish type stuff. And then I went deeper in the archives of stuff I'd never listened to, where I was like, I'm in my 40s. It's time to get into like the 80s indie stuff that I didn't listen to. And so I've been trying to like explore that more and like find the weird good stuff. I think the album this year that I liked the most was probably the new Slowdive. I think that was quite a good album. I think that was very strong.
The first like half of that album is exceptionally good, I think.
Yeah, it's strong. How about you, bud? I feel like what you didn't say, but what you really meant is that the kids are keeping you young in our Discord.
I mean, kind of, but also I've just been trying to look around at other stuff too. I did notice a bunch of people on Twitter, including like Brian Gottlieb and also a couple other people talking about Sleep Token. And I was like, what a weird name.
Magic Twitter's not all bad. I'm
going to listen to Sleep Token. And I do like that record a lot. I think it's very weird and interesting. It's basically like heavy metal Coldplay, I think. And I hope nobody hates that take with it. I I really like half of that record, and I think half of it is actually actively not good, but the part that's good is really good. In a different direction, because I really like guitar bands, I like this album called Cartwheel by this band Hotline TNT that I discovered about 6 weeks ago.
You told us to listen to. I haven't listened to it yet, I admit.
It's like a 30-minute long shoegaze, kind of 10 tracks, really kind of tight poppy version of Hum or Slow Dive, but a little bit fuzzy, a little bit harder to follow even than Slow Dive, less electronica, more rock. But I love this record. It's got some really good, like, memorable hooks. I think it's really good.
I did listen to that. I think we talked about it in our channel.
Yeah. Short and to the point.
Okay.
Hotline TNT.
Do you have a favorite single of the year?
One of the favorite singles that I found recently, I've been listening to this band Wednesday a lot lately. That I kind of discovered via some of Stan's friends, actually, that I was cubing with. And they have this single called Chosen to Deserve that I think is a really good, catchy alt-rock trash bag kind of vibe, but it's a very good album, but also a really good song. So that's what I have as my song that I like.
Wednesday. Is it in the Addams Family cinematic universe?
Is that
it should be.
Popular Netflix TV show?
Yeah, it does the dance.
That's what she's dancing to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mine is from this like Welsh band that I just stumbled upon called Panic Shack. It's just like these maybe it's 4 girls, but they have like Farrah Fawcett hair, but they're contemporary punk rockers. It's called The Ick. And I actually think I listened to it 150 times in like the course of a week on repeat.
Whoa.
It's one of those.
I'm going to have to check it out for sure. 100 times through a song is a lot. So I want to hear it.
I've got nothing here. Stanislav, you and me are movie boys. I feel like
Yes.
Dave is not quite the movie boy.
No, and I love reminding him of that.
Yes, we're always like, Dave, you hate movies. You can't critique them. You hate them.
Daniel Lane.
They all start with a negative with me. I would revoke existence movies.
That's one thing. I got back into movies a lot this year, and I didn't go to the cinema that much. I know that you're a big movies in the movie theater type person, which I appreciate. I just don't do it. But I started cataloging what I've watched, and I kind of the second half of the year has just been a couple a week. And I think like if I total them, I'm probably somewhere like at 60 to 65 this year, which is, enough. That's enough for most people, I'd say. And for me, you made this category, so I'm going to answer it first for you, is The Exorcist was basically one of the most eye-opening movie experiences of my life. I knew of it, right? Like, of course, everyone knows, like, the concept of The Exorcist, but, like, the fact that it's a completely phenomenal movie that I just can't believe was ever made in, like, the manner that it was made. And it's just like the performances are so natural and the dialogue is so natural and like the themes of the movie are interesting and like the effects are interesting. And I think it's like a just, top 25 movie, which is saying something. Like, I think it's just like perfect. It's just a perfect movie.
Are you a horror guy in general?
No, I don't like horror. Like I actually tried, I'd watched more horror this year than I had before. Like I think maybe starting, I know we watched like Halloween this year. We watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Some of the classics. I guess if you call Alien a horror movie, like I think Alien's like a top 25 movie, Alien. But no, I'm not a big horror guy. And I think that's why I find The Exorcist so interesting is like, I don't really consider it a horror movie. I consider it like a good drama that just has horror elements, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for our movie podcast, we'll talk about The Exorcist first.
I can't wait to start that.
Right? I can't wait for this podcast to end.
Can we just have a pop culture podcast, or we just share things we like, 15 minutes at a crack? That's it.
It's that time. Did you watch it because Friedkin died this year? Or
no, just like it was just on my list of stuff I need to watch around Halloween.
Yeah.
Just like I need to finally do this, and it was well worth it.
According to my diary, I've seen 115 this year. So it's so difficult to pick one. But, I saw Oppenheimer in theaters twice. And the fact that I just like kept going back and to see it on larger and larger screens, I think that probably is speaking for something. I was also pretty taken with Flower Moon. Like that made me experience something I hadn't experienced in a cinema in a really, really long time. So I guess big ups there.
Yeah, I've got thoughts on it, but I think I'm glad it was made.
All right, let's move on to TV.
Let's talk about TV. Let's talk about the Dave stuff.
Yeah, I actually think we have more overlap here than any other section.
I think that's true.
Which is interesting.
All right, Shane, why don't you go first? TV. What do you love when you watch TV?
Season of Top Chef was really good, like early 2023. I watched most of Seinfeld this year. It's way different, way funnier as an adult than when I was like 16. Last of Us was probably the best possible version of that show they could have made.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Poker Face was pretty good. It was just fun. It's like a fun lark of a show. It's like Columbo-esque. I thought like you would like that one, Dave, although before the show you said it was just okay.
Well, I mean, I think the mysteries were just okay, but I loved the vibe and I loved Natasha Lyonne in it. And the fact that they were so self-consciously ripping off Columbo, which is like one of my favorite things in the world, was fascinating to me because like even the titles are literally the titles from Columbo. Same color yellow, same typeface.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
It's exactly Columbo. And Natasha Lyonne is not really doing Peter Falk, but she is doing Columbo. Like her vocal delivery of every line is basically Columbo, which is great. It's just the mysteries were not quite as good as like the old 70s ones, but I think the vibe was very good.
Yeah, it's funny how much I don't think the Glass Onion movies are very good at all, but I think that Poker Face is quite good.
Yeah. I'm going to go with a conventional pick here. I really loved The Bear season 2. I know that we've maybe forgotten about it or maybe just
we have not
moved on or we don't want to talk about it because everybody was talking about it when it was on, but that's one of the best. The Bear in general is just one of the best things I've ever seen on television, and so it is what it is. I know that people have problems with how anxious it makes them to watch it, but I love it. I love it in the same way that I love the movie Whiplash, and because I have fantasies, I guess, about how my life or my creative life relates to some of the things that the people in those properties went through. But that's for another story, another time. But yeah, The Bear season 2 is one of my favorite things this year for sure.
That's a really, really good pick. I feel the exact same way. Mine is the discovery of Australian Survivor. Because when we moved to England, we couldn't find American Survivor. And we got Paramount Plus in hopes of watching American Survivor.
Gotta get that VPN, baby.
We're big Probst heads.
Get at us.
And yet it wasn't there, but it had Survivor Australia. And it's like fantastic. It's basically just as good.
Yeah.
And the host, he's not Probst, David something or other. But even though he's not Probst, he's like a good facsimile of Probst in an authentic way, so that he's not trying to do a Probst, but he has enough overlap in his vibe and energy and personality that you appreciate him as like the host and the game master in the way that, I do for Jeff Probst and American Survivor. And
yeah,
it kind of like kept us going throughout the year in a really nice way. Cause then we just started going back for older Survivor Australia seasons, the way you very well can do with OG Survivor 2, which I think is what makes it kind of special as far as like